December 12th. We were getting ready for school when Aaron found the fire truck. It was a big one with an adjustable ladder and small hoses that spooled and unspooled as needed. There were two firefighters in the front seat in full gear with their axes in hand and their respirators on tight. Aaron rushed over to the tree in a wild excitement as he started zooming it around the room. I saw something fall out of the back compartment then and flutter to the ground. I figured it was from my dad, Aaron's grandfather, who had been a strict disciplinarian turned soft old grandpa in his old age. I picked it up and opened it. There was a message inside, and it was short and a little cryptic. To remind you of the first time you strayed. S. The first time I'd what? That was clearly not meant for Aaron. The truck was, but not the note. What was my dad talking about? The first time I'd strayed from what? As I sat and watched Aaron zoom the truck around the living room, though, I suddenly remembered. The first time I'd strayed. The first time I'd been unfaithful. Reggie and I had only been dating a few weeks when Kevin moved into the apartment next door. He was something. 220 pounds, a solid, muscled fireman, and he had only had one look at me in my short skirt and crop top before he'd been forced to look away. It took me a few weeks to muster up the nerve to bring some cookies over for him and his roommate, and they had had plenty of time to cool as I flipped the card over to see if there was anything on the back before I crumbled it up and put it in the garbage. My dad had always been a bit of a religious. I guess it came with the territory when you were a minister, but this was going too far. How did he even know? I'd only ever told one, well, maybe two people about Kevin, and he wouldn't have been able to talk to either one of them. Maybe I'd told Mom, I decided, and figured I'd just let it pass. We were living in their rental house after all, and I didn't want to mess anything up between us. I should have said something there and then, though. December 13th. We got home from school. Aaron found a play school tool belt complete with hammer, saw, and screwdriver. It hadn't been there when we left for school, so I figured it was another surprise from Dad. I set about making dinner as Aaron went around, pretending to fix this and that with his new tools. I didn't give it much thought until he brought me another small note that he'd found in the pocket of the work belt. "It must be yours, Mommy," he said in a childish treble. "I can't read." And then he went back to playing. Great, another sermon from my father. This one was short too. To remind you of the handyman who was oh so handy. S. That would be Jim. Jim was our handyman. Reggie had hired him to fix the place up when we'd gotten married, since he was too busy at work to do his own repairs. The house had been a gift from Reggie on our wedding day. His parents had left him a small fortune after they died, and he had found a new house for his new wife. He'd been working long hours back then, 12 and 16-hour days, but Jim had been more than happy to keep me company and keep me warm when Reggie was at work. I threw this one in the trash too. My anger clouded my mind, or I might have suspected something even then. Who the hell did my dad think he was? Leaving gifts for Aaron and chastisement for me? I had probably told Mom about Jim too. There was that time when Mom liked to live vicariously through me and my little dalliances, but I couldn't believe that she would tell my prudish father about all these indiscretions. I made a mental note to talk to him and went back to making dinner. I still hadn't grasped the depths of what was going on. December 14th. The police car came next. I was trying to coax Aaron out of his pajamas and into his school clothes. He was having a bad morning, and he'd slept poorly the night before because of the wind. To speed him along, I had suggested that maybe we could see if Grandpa had left another present under the tree today. He got dressed quickly after that, but he laughed and said it wasn't Grandpa leaving things under the tree. "It's Santa, Mommy," he said, as though I was slow not to get it. "Santa leaves toys under the tree." "Of course," I said, pulling on his sweater. "It must be Santa. He's rewarding you for being such a good boy throughout the whole endeavor." "What's an endeavor?" he asked. He was always so curious. "It's just a hard time, honey. Let's go have a look and see if we left you anything while we eat breakfast and get ready for school, okay?" The police car was sitting right in plain sight. There was another note, of course, and this one was preachier than the last. To remind you of the policeman who gave you more than a ticket. S. My freaking mom had been running her mouth again. I didn't even remember this one's name, but he'd been so cute on his little motorcycle. He had gotten me for speeding, and I had been. But a flash of the girls and a promise to let him put his handcuffs on me had gotten me out of that little jam. We'd spent a hot hour or so in the back of his squad car, and off I'd gone about my day. When I'd caught pregnant a few months later, Reggie and I had been trying after all, but Aaron did have the cop's sandy hair. I called my parents' house, but no one answered. Dad must be out early, maybe shopping with my mom or something, and I decided to call them that night. I'd had enough of Dad and his high-handed notes and his little spoiling gifts. I had never had a good relationship with Dad. What we had now was grudging love on my end and a father trying his best to support his straying daughter kind of love on his. I would tolerate being in his debt, but I wouldn't tolerate his judgmental ways. I wish now I'd maybe tried a little harder. December 15th. When we got home from school that night, I found the football with a note taped to it. Was he worth it? Yes. Aaron loved football, of course, but I didn't love the memory it brought. Derek was young, still in high school, and I'd seen him and his friends playing football in the street. From the moment I'd seen him, I'd wanted him. He had long blonde hair, he was built like a professional linebacker, and when he smiled, you could see all the carefree love of life that exists in someone who hasn't had their dreams smushed back in their face yet. He was going to LSU, he told me, as he lay naked under the covers on my bed. He was going to LSU and he was going to be a football star. He'd get drafted by some pro team, and maybe he'd even take me with him. I was the best lay he'd ever had, after all, and being with him had made me feel 16 again. Not a 30-year-old mother who'd never quite lost all the baby weight and knew she wasn't as sexy as she had been once. Didn't Reggie tell me so? Not with his words, but with his actions, with his lack of affection, with his lack of attention. I had liked it. I had liked him. I didn't like this note. I tried to call Dad again, but their home phone went to machine. It was 8 o'clock at night, for God's sake. Where the hell were they? Didn't old people usually go to bed early? I'd call him in the morning, I told myself. I'd call him and put a stop to this. If he wanted to give Aaron toys, he could wait until Christmas like a normal person. This needed to stop. December 16th. That morning, I found the straw that broke the camel's back. There was a children's craftsman workbench in my living room, bristling with tools and little building projects, and Aaron ran to it like a kid on Christmas morning. He put on the hard hat and went to get his tool belt so he could get to work, but I was already searching for the note. Where was it, Dad? Where was today's sermon? I already thought I knew what it would say, but I needed to see it, needed to read it. I nearly tore it in half opening it when I found it in the tool bench's little cubby. You just couldn't help yourself, could you? You needed seconds. S. Jim had gotten in touch with me after Aaron was a year old. He said he thought about me often and wanted to see me again. Reggie was at home more now, liked to spend time with the baby, so I had gone to book clubs or got a gym membership so I could get out of the house for a while and feel less stir-crazy. These trips were always to a nearby hotel, so Jim and I could rekindle our relationship in private. After 3 sweet weeks, he told me that his wife wanted to try and work things out, and I never saw him again after that. I did tear the note in half after I'd read it. I called my parents' house in a blind rage. Dad picked up on the second ring, and he sounded like he'd been awake for hours. I could hear Mom puttering about the kitchen in the background, and before he spoke, he swallowed a bit of whatever he'd been eating. I could see Mom now as she cooked his breakfast and ironed his clothes, and he just sat at the table and wrote his sermons and got ready for another day of being retired. Good morning, sweetie. Is everything okay? Did the wind do any damage last? You know perfectly well that my house is fine, Dad. I want to know why you keep leaving these little notes and toys under my Christmas tree. I was angry. I was fuming. And I was expecting some high-handed religiosity about being sure your sins will find you out, or polluting the garden of your marriage with strange seeds. But I got none of that. What I got was confusion. Toys? Sweetheart, I haven't been over to your house in about a week. Not since we watched Aaron, so you could go to that office party. We went to see friends out of town. We left Monday night, remember? We only just got back last night. I saw that you'd called, but it was so late that I didn't bother calling you back. I shuddered, my blood running a little cold as he said it. Put Mom on, I breathed. Sweetheart, I don't Put Mom on the phone, I shouted. I must have startled him, because I heard the phone fall out of his hand and hit the linoleum with a hard thump. Someone picked it up, and I heard quiet chatter on the other end. My dad's concerned, gruff voice, and my mother's softer, more consoling tone in answer. She was always the peacemaker, always the Kissinger, always the one who soothed things over. Honey, what's wrong? Is Aaron okay? Did you guys really just get back from a trip? You really haven't been here all week? There was a heavy pause and then, yeah, we left to see friends. We told you that, dear. We told you we'd be gone for a few days. Is everything okay? You sound very... Have you told Dad anything about what we talked about? About my slips from the path a proper woman should take? That's what we always called them. We used the term in tones of deepest sarcasm, but we'd always called my sexual adventures by that name. I would call Mom up and tell her in a mournful voice that I'd slipped from the path that a proper woman should take, and she would tell my father that she needed to take this in the bedroom, and then ask for details as she got her thrills vicariously. "No," she said, and I could almost hear her look at Dad. "Never, dear. Did something happen? I hung up on her. Aaron and I stayed at home that day and didn't answer the door. I made a trip to Walmart after lunch and picked up a new lock for the door that I installed. If Dad really was playing games, something I was beginning to doubt, he would have to knock first before he played them." December 17th. The little suit came next. It was Saturday, and Aaron was up early to watch cartoons. I told him to make a bowl of cereal and not make a big mess on the floor. I didn't hear any squeals of joy from the living room, so I figured that there was no secret surprise today. I went back to sleep until about 9, and then got up, my own stomach beginning to rumble, to see what I could find to eat. I dropped the eggs on the floor when I looked into the living room and saw what was hanging by the fireplace. It was an expensive, coal-black suit for a child of 6. Aaron was less interested in it, but it didn't need a note to tell me what this one was for. I found one anyway. It was stuffed in the breast pocket, and as I unfolded it, I already knew what it was likely to say. "Nothing was sacred to you, not even my job. S." I had slept with Reggie's boss about 6 months after Jim had stopped calling. I couldn't tell you why I did it. I did it because I could, I guess, and his boss just looked so good in his Armani suit. Our fling was passionate, but burned out fast. 3 months in, and he traded me for a newer model, a secretary with high breasts and well-formed backside, and I sulked off into the distance. Tongues must have wagged about the office, though, because this was the first one Reggie had found out about. He hadn't accused me of it. He'd simply asked me why people were saying that I was screwing his boss. I'd admitted to it, and instead of raging or throwing me out, he had hugged me and said he was sorry for not giving me more attention. He said he wanted us to go to marriage counseling. He said he wanted to be a better man, the kind of man that I deserved. I made another trip to Walmart and bought a flip lock for the door. I also bought locks for the windows and a chain for the back door. I considered a selection of guns in the sporting goods section, but I decided against them. Aaron was young and curious, and if he'd gotten hurt with one, I don't know what I would have done. Dad came over while I was installing things and asked what was wrong. I told him I'd seen someone around the property and was just being careful. He asked if I wanted to borrow a gun, and I told him no. I didn't want one around Aaron, and I was sure that it was nothing. He shrugged and invited me over for dinner later if I wanted. Then he walked back to the house through the field as he always did. I had lied to Dad. I wasn't sure that it was nothing, and became less sure that it was nothing with every day that passed. The note read, "My job." Dad wouldn't have signed it like that. Only one person would have signed it like that, and that person was currently in a padded room somewhere, eating his meals through a tube and screaming himself to sleep. Reggie couldn't be out, and even if he couldn't find us. He couldn't. December 18th. The gift was a costume. Aaron liked costumes. All children like costumes, but this one was exceptionally telling. I was getting ready for church, a job made all the harder thanks to Dad and his Pentecostal ways, and when Aaron jumped out in the red devil costume, I thought I was going to drop dead of a heart attack. I had dressed him about an hour ago. He only had an hour before he tried to ruin his clothes out of sheer little boy curiosity, and when I came into the living room, I saw them thrown haphazardly over the couch. I'd been trying to put in an earring, and the sight of all those children's clothes scattered about made me so mad that I dropped the back. It rolled under the couch, of course, and as I bent down to get it, I yelled at Aaron to come put these clothes back on and hurry up or we'll be late. When I stood up, there he was, red devil costume and pitchfork held high, as he yelled, "Boo!" right in my face. I fell, tearing my dress and scuttling backwards on my butt as the apparition loomed up before me over the couch. He laughed then, fit to split, as my gran would have said, and pulled back the hood to reveal that it was just him. He climbed in my lap and gave me a kiss, my stunned face and overloaded body too keyed up to respond, and said he'd found it under the tree. Santa had brought him a costume for next Halloween, probably because he had missed it this year, and it was so cool and neat, and I barely heard him. I just picked him up and put him in his room and closed the door. The note was lying on the floor next to the tree. Aaron must have thrown it there in his haste to have the costume out. I bent down slowly, and with shaking hands, I picked it up. It was the same notes I'd been getting for the last 6 days. Simply, write your own message notes on a plain white envelope, and I almost dropped it as I opened it to see what my Secret Santa had written this time. A Halloween treat to go with your Halloween trick. S. We'd been in marriage counseling for about a month when I realized that the problem was not my husband. Reggie felt that he was working too much, that he was too focused on his job, that he wasn't an attentive enough husband, and that my cheating was just my way of showing him the error of my ways. He was too hard on himself. I had been kind of a floozy since before we met, but the therapist had showed me something that maybe I hadn't wanted to admit to. The problem wasn't Reggie. The problem was with me. Halloween night, and I was on candy duty. Reggie had taken the night off, and he and Aaron, now 2, had gone out trick-or-treating. He had asked if I wanted to go. All of us had dressed as devils, which I just knew my dad would love when he got the pictures, but I had said no. I told them I was having cramps or some other woman problem, and made my excuses that I'd just slow them down. So off they went, Daddy Devil in his long red cloak and horns, and Baby Devil toddling along at his hand, and Mommy Succubus was free to prowl. Like the cop, I didn't even know his name, but he too was dressed like a devil, and when he sent his kids up the way to keep trick-or-treating, I let him feel a little of my hellfire right there in the entryway. He left with a treat, and so did I. You see, the problem wasn't Reggie. The problem was that now and then, I just liked a little strange. We didn't leave the house that day. The phone rang, but I didn't answer it. Dad came by to see where we were, but I didn't answer the door either. He yelled a little bit when his key wouldn't open the lock, but eventually he left, and I went back to staring off into space as Aaron watched movies on his old VHS TV. He wore the costume, even though I hated it, and before bed that night, I triple-checked the locks and even put a chair under the door. I needn't have bothered. It didn't do any good. December 19th. There was a remote-controlled speedboat and another note. So you remember your time on the water. S. I had met the man with the speedboat while we'd been at the lake house. He was tan and fit, and he'd been watching me sunbathe all day. When he invited me onto his boat, I asked, coyly, if he didn't think his wife would mind. He said he really didn't care, and I found that I didn't either. His boat hadn't been the only thing to go fast, though. We stayed home again, and I made another trip to Walmart. I changed the locks again and bought a camera system for outside. December 20th. We stayed home again after I found a doctor's outfit under the tree. Did you enjoy your weekly doctor's visit? S. Dr. Klein had been my gynecologist for years. His seduction was the easiest of all, and he knew his way around my body better than I did. He dropped me as a client afterwards, but at least he didn't tell anyone. I always thought that was decent of him, more decent than I deserved. I spent the day going over the camera footage. It was a night vision model, so I knew I'd be able to see anyone creeping up at night, but in the hours of spooling through the footage, I found absolutely no one. Not a deer, not a raccoon, not a prowler, not so much as an exceptionally large moth. Aaron was starting to notice that something was wrong, but I told him that Mommy was sick and I needed him to go play so that I could feel better. I found him asleep on the floor of his room, still in that awful devil costume, and trundled him to bed before taking up my vigil on the couch. I stayed up all night that night, sitting in the living room and drinking wine from the bottle. I must have dozed off after I finished the bottle, because when I woke up, December 21st, there was a briefcase under the tree with the initials RF on a gold plate. I looked at the clock on the mantelpiece and back at the briefcase. I had been asleep for no more than 30 minutes, and in that time, someone had come in and left this thing here. I got off the couch and crawled over to the briefcase on my hands and knees. My head was swimming and my heart was pounding, but I needed to see what was inside. I knew who RF was. Randall had been our family attorney and had even been my counsel during the trial, and I was afraid of what I would find inside the briefcase. The combination was put in already, Aaron's birthday, and when I clicked it open, I had to stifle a scream. Inside was a note and a gold signet ring that also had RF stamped on it. The ring was covered in dried blood. I'd counsel you to think about your many sins. S. Randall had been a family friend for years. We'd gone to the same school, the same church, and known many of the same people all our lives. I knew he had a crush on me. He had a crush on me since Sunday school, and I suspected I might need him in my corner at some point or another. When I'd invited him to my bed, you'd have thought Christmas had come early. He was an adequate lover, enthusiastic if not well equipped, and by that point, Reggie had begun to suspect that therapy wasn't working. He'd go right on suspecting it for another year or two, before he finally had his breakdown. I called Dad then. It was the middle of the night, and I expected to find him groggy and grumpy, but for some reason he was awake. He said that something had been nagging at him for a few days, and he'd gotten up to have a glass of water and read his Bible when I'd called. I called him over to the house right then and there and told him everything. I told him about my cheating. I told him about how my marriage had imploded. I told him about why Reggie had gone crazy. I told him about the gifts and the notes and everything that terrified me, and he took me in his arms and calmed me down. We reviewed the footage from my new cameras, and after a few hours, he too could find nothing. He left for a few hours, and when he came back, he had a sleeping bag and a .38 in a holster. Your mother's going to watch the house for a few days while I stay here. We'll catch whoever's sneaking into your house, hon. Never fear. I wish he'd been right. December 22nd. Dad woke me up at 4:30 a.m. and told me to come have a look at this. I'd been startled awake as he shook me, and I detached myself from Aaron and pulled on my house coat as I went into the living room. I'd brought Aaron into my room to sleep. It certainly made me feel better, if nothing else, and he'd wound himself around me in that way that children always seem to. I'd been dreaming of Reggie. Reggie also had his way of constricting me in the night as we cuddled, and in my dreams he turned into a big snake that was squeezing the life out of me. He'd struck at my face just as Dad had woken me up, and I'd probably startled Dad with the violent way I came awake. As I came into the living room, I could see Dad's sleeping bag beside the couch. It was rumpled and looked like he'd come out of it in a hurry. He pointed to the fireplace, and I saw a wrapped box sitting there with a neat card attached to the top. Dad said he couldn't have dozed off for more than an hour, and when he'd woken up, the box was just there. It was a big box, wrapped in holiday paper and topped with a bow. The card looked spooky, almost skeletal, and as I took it, I had already figured out that this present wasn't for Aaron. This gift was for me. We told him how we felt, but how did he make you feel? S. He was talking about Dr. John. Dr. John had been our counselor for 3 years before I finally pulled him off his high horse. I'd had to tell him every one of my dirty little secrets, and I could tell that over the years, he was getting more than interested. He was the one that listened. He was the one who was there, and what he lacked in the looks department, he made up for in experience. I opened the box and immediately dropped it with a throaty scream. It fell sideways, and a pair of arms fell onto the fireplace. They were starting to gray a little, but they were still recognizable. They had been hacked off at the elbows, and they were covered in coarse black hair that ran halfway up the hands. Dr. John had been possessed of very hairy arms, and even the backs of his fingers had little black hairs on them. They didn't have to be his arms. They could be the arms of any man. But I suddenly knew that they were his. I knew how the person knew who all my lovers were, too. John had probably been happy to tell him if it might save his own life. He told Reggie that we were sleeping together after all. I burned them outside in a burn barrel, and despite my dad's objections, I did not call the police. December 23rd. There was no package that morning. Dad was up and making coffee when I awoke, and he handed me a plate of eggs and said it had been a quiet night. He asked if I minded if he went home and got some sleep. I said I didn't care and promised to call him if anything happened. He left me the gun, telling me to keep it out of Aaron's hands, and left through the field back to his house. I wish I'd said more to him. I wish I'd told him I loved him, but it's too late for that now. Aaron and I had an almost normal day. We ate breakfast, watched TV, and even wrapped a few gifts for Mom and Dad as I sat with Aaron and watched Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer and Frosty the Snowman tell their tale for the 1000th time. There was no school to call out from. School was on break until the first of the year, and Aaron and I just enjoyed a nice, quiet day at home. Around 5:30, I realized I needed tape to finish wrapping. We got into the Range Rover and went to the store a few miles up the road. Mom and pop stores were closed up, but the chain stores were usually open this time of year and could be counted on not to close until Christmas. I got some stuff for dinner, the tape, some more wrapping paper, and wished the bored-looking clerk behind the counter a Merry Christmas as Aaron and I went back to the car. I stopped in the parking lot as fine white snow began to fall all around us. Aaron laughed and danced in excitement, catching the snow in his mouth and jumping around as children do in the snow. The wetness fell around me, but I was lost to it. I had eyes only for the Range Rover, for the windshield, for the monstrous lump that sat in the front seat and grinned at me menacingly from behind the steering wheel. It couldn't be. It was impossible. But there it sat like a cancerous sore on the front seat of the SUV, mocking me. A Christmas present with a familiar white card. Aaron was sullen the whole way home. "I want to open the present, Mommy," he whined as I slid through the deepest snows and tried to call my parents' house again and again. "It's for me. It's from Santa." "No, Aaron, this present is for Mommy. I'm just sure of it," I said with false glee. The phone in my hand rang and rang and rang again. Why weren't they answering? Surely they haven't gone out now. Dad must be awake. I needed them. For what felt like the first time in my life, I needed him, and I had a sick feeling in my guts that I'd never see either of them again. Aaron and I pulled up in front of their house, and it sat dark and still. 5:30 should have been prime time for my parents. Dinner to eat, paperbacks to read, crosswords to complete, Mom's knitting needles clicking away, and the darkness inside made me feel sure of what I already knew I'd find. "It looks scary, Mommy," Aaron said, and I agreed with him wholeheartedly. I didn't want to take him inside. I didn't want to go inside at all, but I knew I couldn't just leave them in there. I unbuckled his seatbelt and took him by the hand, and we walked inside the dark house where I did not want to go. The door was unlocked. It opened on oiled hinges and gave out none of that creepy funhouse squeal you always hear in the movies. The living room fire was out, and Mom and Dad's easy chairs looked like crouched ogres in the darkness. I flipped on the lights, and the cheery Christmas tree lights blinked into illumination. The overhead lights didn't come on, and as we walked in, I heard glass snap under my boots. The naked light that hung from the ceiling fan had blown, or had been broken, and in the twisting light of the Christmas tree, we made our way to the kitchen. That's where we found Mom. She'd been doing dishes when someone had come upon her, and she hung out of the sink like a rag doll. She'd been drowned. Someone had held her head under the soapy water until she stopped breathing, and now she slumped in the sink like a woman taking a nap. Aaron stepped back, asking what was wrong with Grandma, but I turned him away from the grisly scene and off towards my parents' room. Dad was in there. Someone had cut his throat. I closed the door and took us to the guest room. That was where I opened today's present, the box I had taken from the Range Rover. The box contained a broken pair of glasses and a tweed coat that was drenched in blood. I sobbed as I saw them, knowing immediately who they belonged to. Samuel had been the love of my life. He was a professor of literature at the local community college, and I'd been taking his class as a lark. He was old enough to be my father, but the smell of pipe smoke and old books that hung around him made me feel safe. He was a generous lover. He would have made a better father to Aaron than Reggie could ever have, and I'd been preparing to leave Reggie for Samuel. I never got the chance. Reggie had caught us in bed together. There had been no time to excuse or apologize. Reggie had shot him in the chest 6 times, and then he turned the gun on me. He dry-fired it another 6 times before realizing it was empty. Reggie had let the gun slip out of his fingers, tears streaming down his face, and simply sat down to wait for the police. He hadn't yelled, he hadn't cursed. He just went limp and waited. 2 months later, he was in a psychiatric facility, and I was moving into my parents' rental home. Now they were dead, and I was left with nothing. Aaron pulled on my arm, and I could tell that he was crying. Well, not nothing, I guess. December 24th. I had meant to leave that very night, but when I went out to the Range Rover, all 4 tires were slashed. Ditto on Dad's truck and Mom's van. I locked the doors and stayed awake all night, waiting for him. No presents appeared, no one came to bother us, and now it's midday on Christmas Eve, and I've finally done what I should have done a week ago. What I should have done when I got the box with the freaking arms in it. The dispatcher didn't seem to understand what I was saying at first, but he finally understood that I'm in the house with 2 bodies and a jacket that is likely murder evidence of some sort or another. I'm waiting in the guest room for them, running my hands over Aaron's duck fuzz of blonde hair. He's asleep, thank God, but I don't know how much longer he'll be able to sleep. The police will have a lot of questions, and I'm sure they will have many for him. I never received Reggie's 12th gift, and I don't think I want to. The wrapped box on the hood of my SUV has been there since morning, but the snow has covered it now, and it's little more than a lump of white. Reggie set out to give me a gift I'd never forget, and he certainly accomplished that. I'll never forget how terrible a human being I am, and how little I deserve the love of the boy that's now sleeping on my lap. Reggie managed to do what years of counseling never could accomplish, and for that, I guess I owe him some thanks. I'm all stranged out for the rest of my life, however long that might be, and if you're reading this, then I ask you to feel no pity for me. My 12 gifts have been well received, and the message was clear. I can see him in the front yard now, waiting for me to come out and get my gift so he can give Aaron his Christmas present. The gift of being free of me. Good evening, everyone. It's me, Dr. Plague. Thank you so much for joining us for tonight's story, and I hope you're having a very merry holiday season. Looks like it's time for me to thank my patrons for their wonderful gifts. Thanks to Leslie Lou Riddle for being our Spooky Skeleton tier contributor. Thanks, Leslie. We just couldn't do it without you. If you too would like to support the show, come on down to Patreon. For just $5 a month, you can have your name read out at the end of every TikTok and every YouTube video that I do. You could also head on over to Amazon. I have 4 books, soon to be 5 next year, and I'm sure I've got something that'll interest you, so come on down and have a look. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening and a wonderfully spooky holiday season.